Yes, changing the conversation now with climate change and ecological concerns in mind globally, the current argument on the restitution of cultural heritage to Africa taking place in Europe is a welcome development for Africans and indeed Nigerians, especially in the area of retrieving artworks of Africa in European museums.
Very apt conversation, I should say. At the moment, there are more voices proposing an alternative way to reimagine and repurpose these major African historical collections, focusing on the potential for retrieving innovative designs for traditional artifacts and material.
And joining us now is Dr. Clémentine Deliss, a French-Austrian curator and museum expert, who will be presenting a model for a new kind of cultural institution for future generations that combines the museum with university-led education centered on past and future collections. She is joined by Azu Nwagbogu, the director and chief curator of Africa Artists Foundation. Both of them will be taking us through rapid response restitution. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm almost curious to ask, what is rapid response restitution? Because I haven't come across that word so often. But also, let me just add that, you know, the conversation and the debate around restitution has intensified in recent times. And I think that President Macron's speech in Ouagadougou to those students in Burkina Faso in 2017 was perhaps the latest we have seen in anybody's, you know, conviction to say these artifacts must return to Africa. Yeah. Since then, we've had the Savoy report that has been commissioned by the president, but we haven't seen so much after that, although there are phases to this. Why is it so tedious to get these stolen artifacts back to Africa?
I must commend you, very well informed.
Thank you.
The structure of the conversation is Dr. Deliss's premise, so I'll let her sort of
Okay, so Dr. Deliss, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I arrived yesterday in Lagos on the invitation of AAF, so I'm very happy to be here.
I hope you've had a fantastic time.
So far, so good. Yeah, very good. Well, actually, the debates, they go back much longer than one realizes. I mean, 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, the big debate in Ouagadougou was important. But if you think back to 1992, when the former president of Mali, Konaré, was also the president of the International Council of Museums, he made a very bold statement at the time, and he said that in Africa you need to kill the Western model of the museum in order for culture and the industries here to flourish. And this was followed up by UNESCO, tried a lot of different kind of strategies to get a lot of the artifacts back to the African continent. And now with the Savoy report, the museums in Europe are beginning to have to look back at the fact that so much was removed, sometimes bought, sometimes given, sometimes swapped, and sometimes looted. And just if you think of Africa alone, there are about 500,000 artifacts that are in museums in Europe, in the former colonizers' institutions. What I find also fascinating is that if you take the 1860s as the marking point of mass tourism, transatlantic steamships, department stores, museums were built then. They were also built on the African continent by colonizers. And at the same time, they were, you know, looting. There was a glut of ethnographic, so-called ethnographic materials that were being brought back to Europe. You know, so two things were going on. The question today is, what does the younger generation do with this? How do they respond? And in the Savoy report, the report that President Macron commissioned, they say quite clearly, if 60% of the youth in Africa, 60% of the population is youth in Africa, how do they deal with this absent knowledge? How do they even speak of a blocked memory?
Yes.
And how do we go about it? And the reason that we're working here together in Lagos, and then I'll pass the word on to you, is to just be a little bit lucid about the fact that the restitution and the politics of restitution, which are also very often politics that are taking place in Europe between the European cultural ministers, that this is going to take a long time.
But my point is, when can we start the process? I mean, Bashir MQ Abiola of blessed memory really started a lot of work as regards even reparation. Payment of reparation for what has been done to a lot of people. In fact, there was a famous video of MK Abiola going to the Badagry Museum to see how slaves were carried away. And while the slaves were carried away, our culture, a lot of our music was taken away, like rap music and the likes. I mean, this is about even jazz, it's said to be. Then substances taken here from the Nana Museum in the, from the Benin Kingdom in the 1800s when the British came into the Benin Kingdom, Rasak Obafo and the likes. These things that were taken away. I mean, devoid of the politics, when are we going to start the program? Because we keep saying, and it looks as though we keep paying lip service. A lot of people will say, President Macron and the Savoy Museum just keep paying lip service to this. There's been talk about this for a long time. When are we going to take action? Recently, a group of Nigerians took action. They brought back the Okuko. They started the protest at Cambridge. At Cambridge, they brought back the Okuko. When are we going to do more of this?
I think it's a really interesting point because what we are concerned with at the African Artists Foundation is really to create the awareness that you are passionate about and I'm passionate about and all of us are passionate about, but there's an absence of knowledge in the younger generation. And maybe the movie Black Panther sort of hinted at it a little until they took a passing interest. But I think also we need to think about new forms of knowledge generation that we can learn from those objects that are even around. We start with that as a point of engagement and point of departure. For example, if you talk to young people today about LGBTQ issues, for example, or Africans, young Africans today, they say, oh, that's so un-African. They don't even understand that the idea of what is African is only 200 years old, only since they've inherited these religious notions of LGBTQ issues. And through a lot of these objects, through a lot of our cultural artifacts, we can understand gender fluidity. We can understand a lot more about our own sophistication with these issues. So my focus and our focus is really to start generating a lot of interest in the younger generation and also new forms of knowledge for conservation amongst them as well.
I mean, like Adesua rightfully mentioned, you know, there was this push by President Macron, especially with him promising they call it a verdict at the end of this report, that he promised to return 26 looted artifacts back to Benin. However, since that report came out, there seems to be a diminishing effect in the push from these artifact people holding on to this artifact. And even in that time, since the 2 years since declaration, only one object has been returned. So it seems that there's this entire cry in the media and there's these reports being put out, but we're not actually seeing the work being done. You know,
young people today, they also one thing that they love, going viral. We want things to go viral. We want the agitation to come from both ends. If President Macron hadn't sparked this interest, we probably won't be having the conversation today, but we need to pick it up.
But it has to be fine-tuned, because the danger is that you think, I mean, you can basically say, are we talking about sending the Mona Lisa back, various versions of the Mona Lisa, right? And you forget that they didn't just, when anthropologists and people looted the African continent, a lot of them were missionaries, and a lot of them believed that in these amazing sculptures, which remained unauthored because they never wrote the name down of the artist who had made them, that the devil was incarnate, right? That they were looking for the unknown of the world. And if we keep to the same track and say, sure, we need to bring back the bronzes, we need to bring back these iconic figures, the danger is that we remain within a 19th century taste that was promoted also by missionaries, that has all the objects, for example, that have been touched, that have signs of human remains, that have blood, all these kind of forms of divination that are so important. These are the artifacts now which are the most expensive on the tribal art market, and these are the ones that are being, if you like, ostensibly fetishized in the press. Now, what's really interesting for me, and this is why we talk about rapid response restitution, is that I'm much more curious about how anthropologists at the time, they also wanted to display everything of a particular tribe, right? So you would have your yam pounding, your instruments, you would have your fish traps, you would have special clothing, and etc. And they would present it like that. I mean, it was pretty gross, right? Now, out of some of these designs, which are objects of virtue, they were very intelligent innovations. It could be that in allowing young designers, engineers, architects, artists to look at them, one could effectively develop new designs out of them and patent them.
Yes.
Right? So a fish trap could lead to an architectural structure because now we use new technologies, right? It could lead to a filter for petrol. It could lead to a structure for
I've seen some of his works
yeah?
even replicated by European artists and sold very expensive.
Very expensive.
But there's in all of this debate, there's one universal question that has also, generated controversies, and that question is: would African countries who want these artifacts back, would they be able to preserve them? And I think that's where you come in, Deliss, because you talk about climate change, you talk about this restitution, but do they have the expertise? They talk about, critics in Europe will say, they do not have the required museums to even keep these artifacts. So they would not even be in place if we give them back. They would disappear.
This is ideology. It's all ideology. These artifacts, they survived very well when they were on the African continent.
Yes.
Yeah? So the question is now, conservation is an ideology. You can't put a hat on because the oil of your head will affect the fact that it might not last for 1,000 years. It's more important that the young generation can understand and try on these amazing artifacts and make new artifacts from them, right? Not reproductions. We're not looking at sort of neo-craft. We're looking really at new design models, new prototypes. And I don't think that for somebody in Europe, you have any right to declare or decide or demand how a museum on the African continent should be run. But I do think, and this is why this research for me is so exciting, that there are options to create, as Oumar Konaré said, a new kind of museum experience, and not just to replicate what one thinks one has already in Washington.
And we have been doing that, and I'll give you a very, very strong example. After we come back from this quick break, we'll be right back. Welcome back, still morning show right here on the Rise News channel. We've got Dr. Clémentine Deliss, and we've got also a very good friend here, Azu Nwagbogu. We'll be talking about art, rapid response and the likes. But while we're on this show, we had the breaking news. The big case a lot of people are waiting for today, that's the call for the review of the Supreme Court of Emeka Ihedioha, the sacked governor of Imo State. The case has been adjourned till the 2nd of March for some filing reasons. So once we get that in our order bulletins, we'll get that out to you right here. But the news is breaking once again on the Arise News channel that Emeka Ihedioha's review case at the Supreme Court has been adjourned to the 2nd of March. So mark your calendars down for that. Coming back to you, Deliss, what I just wanted to say along that line is Africa has a way of really creating its product. And keeping its art. I mean, I was talking about the Nana Living Museum in a small town called Koko, in Delta State. But what I just want to talk about is the sustainability of this art and the respect that ought to be given to Africa for all its great work vis-a-vis, art and development in the world, not only when we celebrate Black History Month. I was giving an instance, for instance, the Shango bone that came out of the Congo, the bone of a monkey, was one of the first tools used for measurement in the world. So I think President Macron should start from that narrative.
These are prototypes, and it's the prototypes, the designs of ingenuity, the designs for survival that we need to be looking at. We don't need more vases. We don't need more cushions. We don't need more fancy chairs. We need things that are going to help in the future, that are ecologically connected, that make the younger generation all over the world aware of the brilliance of African cultures in having produced these things. I mean, why did the Europeans steal them in the first place? Not only because they wanted to understand life's unknowns, and then they took the ritual objects, but they also took everything else that African peoples created.
Like a natural refrigerator called the amu.
Well, there you go.
The clay pot that we put water in, and the water is so cool and it's so ready to drink.
Yeah, you know, the idea of conservation, it's a well-known trope to discriminate or to create a kind of otherness, because it keeps the conversation completely one-sided. And if you actually think about the way these objects are, I mean, because I'm privy to a lot of these, you know, colonial loot bounty out there in Europe, they're not actually properly stored. You'd think that they were like, that you don't get to see them. And they roll it out every once in 3, 4, 5 years, a few of them, and everyone celebrates them. But it's actually a very self-defeatist argument. So I think, but our part, we have a responsibility as well. You know, we have to also take this conversation very seriously beyond the diatribe. We need to start thinking about also paying attention to the objects that are here. We have incredible objects that remain. You know, a lot of people just are still unaware of their value because they misunderstand their religion. You know, they borrowed or they learned religion. So I'm not against any sort of like faith, and I'm completely open to it. But I think the moment you begin to talk about these things, people say, oh, these are, you know, juju objects.
Which is
so
interesting, because what I'm seeing here is like a notable disconnect between what I'll call the activists who are looking for restitution and the cultural professionals. So I'm talking about, you know, the indigenous people, of course, the artists, the curators, who are simply looking to share knowledge, to have access to these artifacts and be able to study them. So if, you know, there's this bone of contention between these two parties, how do we find a balance? Because they both bring important things to the table.
It's a very, very good question. And actually, it's quite curious. And I've only been here like 16 hours. For me to start working in the next, to hear what are the people thinking about at the moment in the regions in Nigeria, in Lagos itself, different people from museum directors to younger artists to designers, generally to find out what the mood is. Because right now in Europe there's some strange stuff going on, and it may be very different to how people are thinking here. Maybe you are being much more constructive and not locking horns with, I don't know, institutions. But the case is that in Britain, no, let's take Germany. In Germany there are up to 5 to 6 million artifacts from all over the world that were taken during the short colonial period and earlier. It's a lot of material sequestered in these ethnographic collections. So what do they do now? They put money into a new Institute of Provenance Studies, and they go back and they try and find the documents that they never wrote up in the first place. The French, they're much more extreme. They bought an MRI scanner, hospital-level MRI scanner. You know those tubes that you go through when you're sick. And they put the most important ritual objects from Africa through the scanner without consulting the priests or the shamans or the holy people or the artists, right? And what do they find out? They find out initiate knowledge. They find out, for example, that in a Songye statue from Congo, there are inner tracts, right, between the mouth and the anus and the penis, so that when the shaman puts in food, the sculpture will act like a human being. Now, this is not knowledge that you divulge unless you are, I mean, the artist and the shaman.
Magician's trick.
It's not a trick. It's seriously important material.
No, but the person receiving it says that as a trick.
But this is what they've done. So they put 150 of the most important and most expensive objects into the MRI scanner. The British, of course, they're keeping stum, because they don't only have a problem of looted artifacts from Benin, they have class and they have race. So the moment they start opening the Pandora's box up, whoa.
No, they can't. Not in a Brexit Britain.
You did mention UNESCO briefly in passing earlier, and I want to bring in a UNESCO Convention against illicit traffic of cultural heritage here. Some people say, you know, the problem here is that convention is slowly being ratified by countries. They're not doing enough. Also, it doesn't cover the colonial eras, so there's a problem there. You talked about voodoo and juju. Yes, we're said to be so barbaric. We're said to be worshipping idols, but those were the idols that were stolen away from us. Just how important is it for us to get this back? Another report looks at the Africa 2063 plan and says, not enough mention was made about culture and heritage in the 2063 Africa plan. Do you think Africans really want these artifacts back? And how important is it to get them back?
I think that's a really good question. I think, honestly, the work that we have to do is to make it known to the younger generation that this is massively important. And it's not really important because of the iconographic objects. It's more important because we believe that there's a truncation in knowledge. If you think about the disinterest that comes with a complete, confiscation or, removal of your heritage from a very strong period. And if you speak to any young Nigerian or young African today and you talk about culture and art, they immediately look back to think about mass and think about objects that were produced in the past. If you say that to a Westerner and say, oh, your culture and your art, they immediately think of something contemporary, like something cool and hip, something forward-thinking. And that tells you that it's a mental block. And that mental block cannot... so the objects for me are important, even in an iconographic sense, but also important from a practical knowledge-generating sense. Like, we can actually generate a lot of information from studying them, from paying attention to the things that... Because it wasn't just about spirituality when we had these objects. It was also entertainment. Like, maybe putting the little thing through the mouth. It probably entertained the community.
Okay, we're almost out of time. While we're having a rapid response restitution, the conversation is today. Tell us more about that very briefly in about a minute.
That'll be tonight. Yeah. It'll be highly illustrated, lots and lots of great photographs of artifacts which I think could be prototypes for the future. And it's at 7 o'clock at the Alliance Française in Lagos.
Center?
Yes, exactly. And it would be fantastic if we had a really proper conversation around it, because that's why I'm here, to hear voices.
What do you hope to achieve at the end of this conversation tonight?
We're hoping to spark interest, to have a real proper conversation with a wide demographic group. Young people should be there, museum directors should be there, Prince Yamisi Shelan will be there. He sees just upon an important museum.
Yes,
we want to get everyone.
And we hope people will open up their collections and begin to look at what they have at home and realize that actually these small things that seem so unimportant but belong to the great-great-grandparents are really the prizes.
Okay, check. You never know what we'll have at home.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
But quick breaking news again, the Supreme Court, has adjourned the filing of application, and the application hearing, I should say, for the Emeka Ahedi case till the 2nd of March. Stay with us. You'll have that in other bulletins. That's our show for you today. It's been a great show.
Indeed. I am Adesu Almoran.
I'm Rufai Hosseini.
And I'm Sheto Atigari. Thank you so much for watching. You can also follow us on all our social media handles showing now on the screen with live streaming on arise.tv.